appreciate that immensely. We're changing some things up as well in our preaching time. We have been in the book of Psalms in the Sunday morning time, but we're going to change that up as well and have you go along with us to Hebrews chapter number 11. That be all right? Amen?
Amen.
All right, so Hebrews chapter 11, when you find your place, we'll share with you the message the Lord has shared with our hearts, and we'll pick up in Psalms tonight in chapter number 52. So by faith today, we're going to talk to you about Abraham and Sarah. It's a simple, easy topic or title. We want you to see some great details about them. As you do find your place in Hebrews 11, ask that you would stand with us, and I'll try to adjust to you sitting on the wrong side and me looking at the wrong side. So we'll work on all this together. Just change some things up along the way, all right? Everybody's happy, you know it? Say amen? Amen. Amen. All right, let's get into the preaching time of the Word. I enjoy the singing. I enjoy all that God does in the music time. And we are by no means anybody here professionals, and we're not downgrading anybody. But we're doing our very best to be a pleasing sound unto God. Amen? That's what we're working on to do. And we pray that you have found help in the songs today. Because it is in Christ alone that we stand. We thank the Lord for that. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8 through 19. And by faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for inheritance, here's a key phrase right there. He obeyed. And he went out, and not knowing whither he went, but look what he did. By faith he journeyed or sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of that same promise. For he looked for a city which hath foundation, whose builder and maker is God. Through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. We see that he obeyed and she was faithful. And we'll share a couple more things here. Therefore sprang there even of one, and him as a good as dead. Let me get that again. And him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. These all died in faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they had came out, they might have had an opportunity to have returned. But now they desire a better country, that is in heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. By faith Abraham was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received in him in a figure. So there's our reading today. I want you to notice a couple things. Verse 8 starts out with Abraham. Then we get to verse number 11, starts out with Sarah. Then we go back to verse 17 and comes back to Abraham. I'm going to share you 3 points about each one of those as we go along, and hope to be a help to you this morning in the text today. Hebrews 11, by faith Abraham and Sarah. Let's pray. God in heaven, we do love you again. Thank you for the opportunity that you've given to us to be here this morning. I thank you for these that have come. God, I pray that you visit with those especially who would have liked to have been here, but are so sick, so bedridden, so beaten up with sickness and pains. God, that you'd help them, encourage them, and strengthen them. And Lord, I pray that you'd help us today as we come before the throne of grace. Lord, I pray that you'd fill my mind, heart, and soul with things that be pleasing unto you. And God, that you alone would get the glory today. Father, I pray most important today that you take your love and compassion that you have, the grace and mercy that you have to offer to people today. If there's somebody here who does not know you as Savior, somebody who's in a backslidden condition, somebody who's never accepted you, Lord, I pray that you meet that need here this morning. And I also pray, God, for the saints that are here, those who believe and trust and hope in you, God, they find the help that they need. They be revived in what's being said today. Lord, it's your word that does this great work. It's not the preacher, it's not the songs, it's not any of that. It's you alone doing the work. And in that, Lord, we stand and believe and trust in you. I pray that you forgive me where I failed. You give me the unction of the Holy Spirit from on high. And when all is said and done, we leave here saying how good it has been to be in the house of the Lord. We love you and thank you in Jesus' great mighty name. Amen, amen. You may be seated. Each week I share with you some topics and titles that are given to each character that we have read along to you. If you recall, Abel, we mentioned to you, each one of those had the letter U that starts with their name. I want you to see Abel was someone who had an unforgettable faith that still yet speaks. If we look at Enoch in the previous verses in chapter number 11, we see about Enoch, it's an unmistakable faith that caused him to separate. Noah, we talked to you about last week, has an unsinkable faith that sustained him. Now these two today, I want to share with you Abraham and Sarah. Abraham had an unbelievable faith that satisfies. That's his faith, that satisfies him. And Sarah had an undeniable faith that shows. Okay, now, satisfy and show. Notice the terms I want you to, those two terms I want you to notice is because Abraham was satisfied with the words of God, and because of that, he moved in action to the words of God. Then we talk about Sarah. It was an undeniable faith that showed. How does it show in Sarah? She was pregnant. It's undeniable. You cannot deny the fact of Sarah's faith. She believed in God. How do we find that? In verse number 11, we see that she found him to be very faithful into his promises. So I'm glad that we can see these things about these people. But as I look at Abraham, I found it pretty strange, and I honestly had never paid attention much to the history of him. More or less, we look at Abraham and begin to think of him being the patriarch saint, the one who followed after God. And that's the one that we put motion into as far as the plans and the works and the meanings and the revelation of the salvation that we speak about and preach about every day. But as I looked at the life of Abraham, I found that his dad and even some of his previous aunts and uncles, we might say, of the other generations, what I found most shocking was they were idol worshipers. You can read that in Joshua chapter number 24. It'll give you a little detail of that they served other gods. And that's what makes me wonder so much why that God, the God of heaven, would take Abraham and pluck him out of a situation so bad like that and use him to be a mouthpiece for generations and generations to come. I marvel at that. Why would God pick somebody like that? Why would God use somebody like Abraham? I believe in breaking things. If you come over on work day on Tuesdays, and I know James, I don't know where you moved to, James, but he can give me an amen on this. We like to break things on work day, and we like to rebuild them once we break them. But what I'm meaning by that, in this sense, I want you to notice what God does to Abraham. He's breaking a generational curse. If all of us would just believe for a moment that we all have no hope and have no chance of ever making heaven our home, God would intervene. Let's say in this room, in this setting, there's a group of us, looks like 63 on the board here today, and he would just spawn in the heart of one individual to believe in him by faith. He has an opportunity, that one individual, Abraham, to take time with these other 62 that are in the room and share with them the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if you believe what Abraham believed by faith, in doing so, you would break the generational curse. So that means this: if Abraham had followed along in the footsteps of his uncles and his dad, he too would be an idol worshiper, and he too would have no hope of ever making heaven his home. But I'm glad along the day that Abraham was sitting in the cool of the day, God appeared to him and spoke to him, and by faith he believed in God. Can I tell you this morning, if you plan to believe in God, you too must believe in him by faith. It's not by experience, it's not by what somebody else has done, it's not by your bank account, it's not by any of that stuff. It's by faith you believe that God is, and he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. So I'm astonished by the fact that God would take somebody like Abraham out of a situation so terrible, so bad, going nowhere spiritually, and pull him out of that situation and allow him to be the forerunner of all things Jesus Christ, and that pertains to in the book of Genesis. What a great testimony that we have in Abraham. It always strikes me by that. But I ask myself, when I think about that, I go a little bit further. Why would God do that? It's because God had better plans for Abraham, and he also has better plans for you. The reality of the situation that we face is that we think we're making our own plans. We make our own destinies and our own choices. Well, most of your choices sometimes, listen closely, will also make your destiny. You make the wrong choice, you will reap the wrong benefits of that choice. Amen goes right there. Amen. You make the right choice, more than likely you're going to be coming at the right outcome of that situation. It will be much better for you than it will be hardship for you. So that's why I believe God pulls him out and makes him in the right direction, or points him in the right direction. Abraham, we find it to be in this three sections. I want you to notice this quickly. Abraham, he was a faithful follower of God. It's because of that following of God impacted his family to believe in God. Let me just say here for a moment, dads, it starts with you. God has put it in order for you to be the head of the house, just like Abraham was, and it starts with him. It starts with you. Your job is to lead your family spiritually to all things pertaining to God. Everything that lines up with the Word of God. If it's not lining up with the Word of God, you need to do what everyone else would do. Cast it away and follow after the Word of God. It's not a social gospel. It's not a social gospel to the point that if it's all right and lines up with what social and things of this life are doing, it's not about that. The Bible is clear to tell us that we are different than everybody else. We should walk different, talk different, act different, go to different places, and be different than the world is. By the way, that's another point for amen right there. We need to be different than this world. And I see when Abraham is a faithful follower, it affected everybody in his household. I also see, secondly, about Abraham, not only was he a faithful follower of God, but he was a faithful man for his family. I've realized as we think about the story of Abraham and Isaac in Genesis chapter number 22, you know the story about him going to offer Abraham going to offer Isaac up to the Lord. And what I find so astonishing about that is because we read the words of the son Isaac. The son says to him, Father, I see the altar, I see the fire, I see the wood, I see everything that is pertaining to the sacrifice. But where is the sacrifice? That means to me this, that this wasn't the first time that Isaac had been to a place where Abraham had been worshiping God. He was not only a follower of God, but he was a faithful man to his family. This was nothing new to them. I can tell you this much. I've been in church my entire life. I'm 48 years old. I told you time and time again, I'm a drug baby. I was drugged to Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Friday night singing, Bible studies in the week, vacation Bible school, revivals across town, and homecomings, wherever they were. We were doing all that. I was drugged to all those things. So when I tell you that, I'm believing that my dad was like an Abraham to me. He was a faithful follower of God, and then he became a faithful man for his family. Thirdly, I want you to see here, not only was he those two things, but he was also a faithful man for a nation. The reality of who Abraham was impacted the entire nation of Israel. I want you to think about that for a minute. Your life in front of Jesus Christ could impact this entire community of New Chicago that we live in. Can you imagine that? It would happen, but it would have to start with you. You have to be that faithful individual by faith. Notice the topic on the board. By faith. Every single character that's mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. By faith. It happens because it's not what you're doing, but it's what God can do in you. Amen to that. And if God can do all those things for Abraham, just imagine what he can do for you and I today. How does that even relate? I'm going to give you this and I'm going to give you my 3 points. It relates this way. Abraham, the outreach that he had was limited to his voice. He does not have Instagram. He doesn't have Facebook. He doesn't have Twitter, Snapchat, any of these social media outlets that we use and have on a readily available basis. He didn't have all those. But he impacted an entire nation just by believing and following after God. How much more can we do right here in our little town that we have? Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a young lady, if Marcia would remind me, I think her name was Danielle, that came here the other day, wanted to talk to us about the phone book. You remember she came a couple of weeks ago? And she wanted us to put a little bitty ad in the home page of this phone book, about 2 by 3 for $300. Put this in there and then you can have an advertisement in there for an entire year. Well, I understand the process of that, and I understand the reality of using that, but I thought to myself, the reality of that is that more of us never use a phone book anymore. We go to this thing, this wonderful thing we put in our hand called a smartphone, and we go to this little gadget, we tap this little thing on there that says Google, and we go churches in my area, and it brings up everything on there. So the reality of needing a homepage book was not really there. What I'm trying to get you to see is that the outreach that you can have is greater than even that of Abraham. He impacted an entire nation, one single man. I'm asking you today, will you believe in faith what God can do for you can impact the entire community and where you live? I believe it. I know that it can. It takes you and I to get out, not only on social media, but to even go next door and say, hey, I'm a member at the church down the street. Would you mind coming over with us? Share the gospel with them. Tell them about the love of God. And I guarantee you, some will reject it, some will receive it. It's up to you and I to make the difference. All right, let's go to point number 1. Everybody all right? Amen? Amen. Amen. All right, point number 1. By faith, Abraham and Sarah, I want you to see first thing about Abraham. I want you to notice Abraham's call. Let's look back at verse number 10, or 8 through 10, and share these with you. I want you to notice in verse number 8, by faith Abraham, when he was called. Notice his call. Notice his call. Abraham was faithful in his travels, I believe. Abraham was faithful in his travels. In letter A, I want you to see on the board, he was called to a place he did not know. He was called to a place he did not go, or did not know. And what I like about the fact that even that he did not know where he was going, he still yet went. Where do you get that from? Look in the verse with me. It said he's called to a place to go into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance. And then what? He obeyed and went out not knowing whither he went. Now that doesn't make any sense to us today. I guarantee you there's some of us here that don't go too far out of our driveways without hitting the little button on the Google Maps and letting it direct us from point to point to point where we needed to go. And I can believe this today. Abraham got in the car, we might say, loaded up the chariots and the donkeys and went on his way, just simply believing that where he was going to be is exactly where God wanted him to be. Here's what I want you to notice about letter A. He was called to a place he did not know. Let me just help you with this. Any place with God is the right place to be.
That's right. That's right.
A lot of times we get into places and areas of our life where God's a million miles away from it and we think we're in the right spot. Can I tell you today, you're the furthest thing away from God, but when you are in the right place, you'll be in the right place with God than by yourself. Amen.
That's right.
I'd rather be there with Him than by myself. Letter B, I also want you to see, he was called to a purpose. He was called to a place. He was called to a purpose that he could have never seen. What I want you to see in that section, he was called to be the minister for an entire nation. Who would have ever thought that Abraham, of a seed of a family that did not believe in God, a family seed that did not believe and trust in God, they believed in idols and worshiped idols, and no doubt on a continual basis were doing that every single day of their life. And all this man was pulled out of there that he could be used for a purpose that he had never seen. I would challenge you today just to ask God to put you in a place where you can be used and then find your very purpose. Here's the very important key. Your purpose may not always add up with what God's purposes are.
Right.
My purpose, as you all well know, was to move to South Carolina. Here we are 3 years later. My purpose is not God's purpose.
Right.
I wanted to be in South Carolina. It's much warmer in South Carolina. And by the way, the beach and the ocean is in South Carolina. I would have been like 30 minutes from there. Now I'm 3 hours by plane. But I'm in the right purpose.
Right.
I need you to understand, it's very important. Don't miss the big letter words on this board here. Place, purpose, and promise. When you're in the right place, you'll find the right purpose, and you always have God's divine promises.
Right.
But when you get all those out of order, and you start doing things and acting accordingly to you and your plans, is when you're going to find yourself in a very bad situation. I want to encourage you, get where God can use you. Get where God can be seen in you, and then you can be impactful right where you live in your community. Notice here, letter C now, I want you to see he also was called to a place, called to a purpose, but he was also called to a promise he could not imagine. Think about this little promise. It's called Beulah land, Canaan. They were all in search of this place. God had put a desire in his heart that he would find this place, this promise. I think about it this way. It's better, that place of Canaan, that Canaan land that he was going to, was a place that it was far more beauty than anything he'd ever seen in his life. It had just made him in awe of anything he could ever think of. I found some beautiful places in this country we live in. And in a few weeks, Ron and I are going to fly over to London, and we're going to take a drive over to Wales. And there are some beautiful, beautiful scenic areas out there in these rolling hills with sheep running all over. It's some beautiful scenic places. But one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to is right here in Virginia. We came out of the Big Walker Mountain. We're running down the toll road, going through Highway 77. We come out of Big Walker Mountain, and you come out into the Shenandoah Valley right there. It is one of the most beautiful, spectacular places you'll ever find on God's green earth. But as much beauty as that is, as much as I can wrap my mind around all the colors of green and all the waterfalls and things that are projecting off of each side of your view as you go down through this little cascade of an area there. It's just all taking as you go. It's beautiful. It's breathtaking. I think about how much that is and how lovely that is. But what Abraham found in God was better than anything he'd ever seen. Think about this promise that's been available to you. The Bible clearly tells us that Jesus went away to prepare a place for us. And in doing so, we can also go back to the words of God and also see that eyes have never seen what God has prepared. But God has revealed them to us how? By His Word, by His Spirit, all things. We can't imagine them. We can't think about how good they are. We can't hear the stories of this where Abraham was. We see the place, the purpose, and the promise, but it's because of God's images, it's better than anything that we could ever imagine. Let me just clear you on this and help you hopefully with this. When you are in the right place, following the right purpose, the promises of God will be better than anything you could ever imagine. Amen. Just trying to tell you, that's where it's at. We accepted this job, I believe it was, maybe Judy can help me on this, I believe it was in the last week of November, or the first week of December, somewhere around there, about 3.5 years ago. And there hasn't been a day that this has been a burden for me to come here. It hasn't been a hardship for me, because I know that I'm in the right place. I know that I'm in my right purpose. And God's promises are better than anything South Carolina could ever have offered. I believe that with all my heart. If I didn't believe that, I would close my book, I would grab my bride, and we would leave this building today, and we'd never come back. But I believe we're doing exactly what God has called us to do. I'm not Abraham. I'm just Jerry right here in New Chicago today, telling you that if He could do that for Abraham all those years ago, if He could do that for Jerry 3.5 years ago, what could He do for you today? The same exact thing. Number 2, let's go there. Ms. Vicki, let's look at this one. Notice Abraham's call, but also want you to notice Sarah's comfort. Sarah's comfort in verses 11 and 12. Verse 11 and 12 reads like this. Through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore sprang there even of one, and him a good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. I want you to see Sarah's comfort. Also I want you to notice she's the first woman mentioned in this, what we call the halls of faith of Hebrews chapter 11, number 11. Her inclusion in this chapter is not something out of the norm because she's a woman. That's not why she's included here. She's included here, it's different because of her initial lack of faith. That's why she's included. Well, what does that mean? This is a faith chapter, faith book. Well, we want to take a moment and share with you that she is noticed here because of her lack of faith. She was, how old was she when she was conceived with child? 90 years old. If the doctor told you, ladies, at 90 years old, hey, you're going to have a baby, you would have done exactly what she did. You would have laughed in his face. Right? Am I right, ladies? You would have laughed in his face. Here's a lady who's 90 years old. And here's a husband who's 100 years old. Now you can think all the things you want to think about this story, but with God, all things are possible. Right. All right? So it's different because of her lack of faith. That's why she's included here. Notice in her lack of faith, she laughed at God. But here we find in verse 11, it says that she found strength to conceive seed, and she found him faithful who had promised. She not only was unfaithful in believing in God, but then God moved upon her heart, and now she's become to the realization that God is faithful who had promised. Here's what I want you to see about this. This part that God recalled about Sarah is the fact that she counted him faithful in spite of her unbelief, in spite of her denial, in spite of her laughter, and even of her age. God still yet used her. Let me help you with this. Some of you will say, well, I don't have the ability to speak very well. I don't have the ability to maintain the scriptures in my mind. I can't do that. I don't have the ability to sing very well. Well, then get in the choir loft and sing with everybody else, and nobody will hear how bad you are. I don't have the ability to be a teacher. I can't articulate my words properly that would share and be astonishing to people in a sense. We're not overwhelming you with words, but something to make you go, oh man, I didn't know that about myself. I don't have this, I don't have that. Look at this passage right here. He's 100 years old. God's using him to make the seeds of a nation. She's 90 years old. The inability to do all these things just seem impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Get involved. find your place, find your purpose, and receive His promises. Here's what I want you to see now about Sarah. A, B, and C. She was comforted with His strength. You have to be at 90 years old. I took my mom and my aunt out to eat yesterday, and unbeknownst, nobody knew what I was preaching on today, especially this part right here. A man came in the table just off to our left, and as he came in, he brought his dad with him. And they had obviously been frequently to this restaurant to the point that the people, the servers there, were mentioning them all by name. And the guy said to the lady there, said, "This is my dad, my dad here is going to be 90 or 89 years old tomorrow," which means today. And I had no clue of that, Ronnie. I watched this man walk in, and he was on his own, didn't have a cane. The son was not helping him. He was on his own walking into this place. He pulled his own chair out and sat down by himself. I'm sorry, what was it? 98. I said, what did I say, 89? Okay, 98. That makes a big difference. Here we go. So 98 years old, walking in by himself, no cane, no walker, no wheelchair, all the things he's doing, pulls his chair out, orders his own food, and they sang happy birthday to him, brought him a big old thing of ice cream with a candle out of it. He blew out the candle by himself, there's only one. He blew that out by himself, and he dived into this ice cream at 98 years old. I thought to myself, I would pray at 68 I'd be that good. Right? At 68, I'm only 48, 20 more years, I'm hoping I'm that able to move around like this guy. Think about this lady, Sarah. She's 90 years old and giving birth to a baby. That's why she needed strength. Letter A, she was comforted with His strength. Here's what I want you to see about this. In her ability, she could not do it. Can I get amen there? Right. She's 90. She had to have the strength that was out of this world. The very strength of God was the only thing that was going to make this happen. And in doing so, she was comforted with His strength that He can make a 90-year-old give birth to a nation. I want you to see letter B. She was also comforted with the seed. The seed. This was the promised seed. Notice with me here in verse number 11. Therefore, through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed. What is this seed? It's the promised seed. It is the child, the person, Isaac. She's receiving this child at the age of 90 that was going to be a blessing for generations to come. She understood that it was not only a strength that she needed, but it was also the seed that this world needed. You have to realize the things you do for Jesus Christ sometimes are out of your capacity. What you do may never affect you directly, but it will affect the nation if you let God do something in you. Amen. Not only was it the promise for her, but it was also the promise for Abraham. It would lead generations and generations. But I also see letter C, she was comforted by or with the same. I thought about this morning. I'm not going to the beach, but I don't like bringing the beach home with me. That sand gets everywhere and everything. In your shoes, in your bag, everything you try not to have it in. It gets in the cracks and crevices of your life that you don't want them in. It's in places you don't want nothing to do with it, and after a while it begins to irritate you. Can I get amen right there? Right. You understand what I'm saying? But I want you to see what's taking place here. She was comforted with the sand. It wasn't based upon granules, as we see that it was innumerable here in verse number 12. It's not about those grains of sand that we may see at the beachfront. It's about the grains of innumerable outcome that God would do on behalf of people. What I want you to see here, this comfort was in the generations living for God. Remember I talked about Abraham breaking the generational curse? I don't know how many lineages back it went that Abraham's family worshiped idols, but at Abraham's point of understanding who God is, that curse was broken, and there was a generation now living for God. I can't encourage you enough to be like Abraham and be like Sarah. Believe by faith and follow after God in His place, His purpose, and His promise, and I guarantee the outcome will be right. Amen. I guarantee it. Let's go to number 3 this week, the last one. Everybody all right? Amen. I want you to notice Abraham's commitment in verses 13 through 19. Abraham, the only way you're going to be committed like this this, is you have to see things through the eyes of God's perspective. That's the only way it's going to happen. The only way that we can view things is with a heavenly view. If you and I view things through man's eyes, we will always see the negative side of it. We call that today, in today's terms, the pros and cons of it all. If you're in any kind of a business, you always weigh out the pros and cons of a business, especially in an investment area. And it may cost you something up front, but the dividends or the returns of it should be greater than what you've invested in. That's the process of what we're doing here. And Abraham was looking at it in that process. He was saying, I can see right now that if we would give birth to this child Isaac, that generations and generations to come would have an opportunity to live for God just like we are. And we cannot view them through the eyes of man. What did the eyes of man do? Laugh in the face of God. Deny the very fact that God can do it. I believe, as I've told you time and time again, that if God wanted to, He could grow grass right down the middle of Huber Boulevard, if that's what He wanted to do. I believe that. I also believe that God can do things that we never thought or imagined He could ever do. Let's notice a few things here. His eyes were not on Himself, but they were on God. My friends, that's the best place for you to be. Have your eyes upon God. Abraham had faith to assure him that he was doing the right thing, even when things didn't go well. Ever had one of those days? Ever had a day that, where's Becky? Becky and Marshall's over here now. There you are. I looked over there first. I had to go over here. You had a day at the preschool. It's just been out of control. There's kids have just been unruly. There's nothing you can do or say. You can't turn the lights off fast enough, give everybody time out to go whistle. Nothing you can do to make it happen, to make it any better. That's because we're looking through man's eyes. It just seems like it's no hope, no chance. Well, with man, there is no hope, no chance. Well, I'm glad with God all things are possible.
Amen.
I'm going to give you A, B, and C of this, and I'm going to quit. Notice Abraham's commitment. He continually looked for a city. That's in verse 10, verses 15 to 16. The very promises God had told Abraham about, he continued to look for. He continued to look for. Here's what I want you to see. He also knew that this promise of a city was better than any city he'd ever visited before. I don't know about you, but I can tell you about places. You can tell me about some of the places you traveled, some of the ships you've been on, and some of the areas of port that you went to, and how beautiful, how wonderful those are. But that's not what we're talking about. Those on the outside can be looking beautiful. I know that when we fly in over Chicago, coming in, you come over Lake Michigan, from 20,000 feet, the city of Chicago looks wonderful. On the, what we would say, the aesthetic outward appearance of it, it looks great, especially from 20,000 feet. But the reality of it, there's crime, there's pain, there's sorrow, there's anguish all going on downtown in the city of Chicago. Right. That's not the place, the city that Abraham was looking for. And I pray to you that you got your heart made right with God, and the place you're looking for is not a temporal place here, but you're looking for that city He's going to prepare. Amen. And I want you to have your eyes on heaven, not on the things we can see. And we got to get past the 20,000, 30,000 feet in the air. We got to go past that and see that where God's going to prepare is better than anything we've ever been a part of. I see that we look for a city. He looked for a city who knew, but also he knew that the builder and maker of it was God. That's the important factor of it all. He looked for a city with had foundations, then whose builder and maker is God. That's in verse number 10. What a great city that has to be. What's it see in letter B? Not only did he look for a city, but he also looked for a country. In verse number 16. The city was a wonderful place to dwell. Listen to me very closely. For him and his family. Thankfully, Abraham did not just settle for a city for him and his family. He knew a greater outcome. Remember what I told you? He impacted an entire nation. He looked for a city, but he was looking for a country that he can impact for God.
That's right.
Once we get this taken care of, what's the outreach then? Remember Nineveh? That place that our good friend, who went there to preach? Jonah was his name. He got caught up in denying the things of God, and God sent him a different way, and roundabout they went, and finally came back, and he preached. If I'm right on this subject, it's either 8 words or 9 words he preached, and the entire city of Nineveh was saved.
Yes.
all because of one man's willingness to follow God. Did it take him a long time to get there? Did he have bumps along the way? Did he have had pitfalls along? Yes, he did. But when he was in the right place, God used him in a mighty way to affect an entire country. That's where we need to find ourselves. If you commit yourself to God, not only can He affect your city you live in, but the very country that you're applying. Lastly, I want you to see here, let us see. He looked for Canaan land. He heard all the stories. He heard all the stories about how it flowed with milk and honey. He heard all the stories about it was a land of wheat and barley, had wonderful grapevines and fig trees and pomegranates. And it was a land of olive oil, a land of just honey flowing literally like a waterfall. But what I like most about this land of Canaan, it wasn't so much about the things you could receive from that, meaning these milk and honey and berries and wheat and barley, not so much those things. But here's what I want you to see, why he looked for this country. Everybody ready? Everybody ready?
Ready.
It's astonishing. Here's why he looked for Canaan. Because God was there.
Amen.
That's why he was looking for it. That's why his eyes were always upward looking to heaven. Because where God was more important than to where Abraham was. He was looking for a city, a country, in a place called Canaan land that was better than any place he'd ever been. Because it's a land where God is the king and where God reigns. It's a land where there's no pollution of sin. It's a land a place of no sickness or pain. It's a land where the sanctuary of heaven will be filled with just the praises of God. It's a land where faith will end either in sight or inside, whatever one you want to call it. It's also a land where you will never have to part ever again. My final question to you is a song from the Crying family. They sing the song, Don't You Want to Go? Don't you want to go? Don't you want to go with me to God's new city? Don't you want to go and hear the heavenly choir sing? Don't you want to go and touch the nail-scarred hands that brought this great salvation plan? Don't you want to go? It's a place far greater than anything we could ever imagine. He received it how? First off, because he accepted the call. Secondly, because Sarah went after it after she was comforted in the presence of God. Thirdly, we find that it was all obtained because they continued in the commitment. I'm asking you today to take a moment of inventory of your own life as Mike and them come and get us a song together and see where you are with this section of text. By faith, Abraham and Sarah, by faith, they changed the entire nation believing in God. My question to you today is, by faith, will you let God change your circumstances, your place, for His purposes? Will you be willing to do that today? That starts out just as we shared with you at the beginning. Abraham was a faithful follower of God. He was a faithful man for his family, and he was also a faithful man for his country. The question I'm asking you today is, will you follow God in faith? As Mike sings and you stand.